Hello and welcome back to Cambrian's virtual show, where we're doing a virtual show. Oh dear, I'm going to get this intro right one day. Between the 22nd and the 29th of May, we're going to be delivering on average 3 speakers a day. If you're wanting to see the previous speakers, then you can go to our website and check them out on there. So www.cambrianphoto.co.uk. You can also see previous speakers and all the speakers sort of coming up as well. We are happy to say that all the virtual talks that we're doing are absolutely free. Because of this, we are asking for donations, which will be going to chosen charities and our local food banks as well. A link in the description should be available just now. There we go. So yes, this is our 7 o'clock, so we've got no more today, but we've got some more stuff coming tomorrow, which I'll sort of go through at the end of it. So without further delay, let's introduce our speaker for this evening, Tracey. Give her a big warm welcome. Hello, Tracey.
Hi, Paul, you okay?
Yeah, I told you I'd muck at that beginning. I had to go. We'll get there.
You'll get it right. You've got a few more days.
Yeah, we'll get there by the end of the week. It's fine. You've got some nice toys set up there, I see.
Oh yes, welcome to Mission Control. I've purposely surrounded myself with goodies just so that I can give people a bit of a rundown of what we've got.
I like how it's purposely and not accidentally.
Well, it does look like this most of the time anyway, to be honest. And I think if I was to surround myself with everything, you wouldn't be able to see me.
Right, okay, fair enough.
It does look a bit like Cambrian in here, though.
Yeah, Cambrian Mark. Joel keeps calling your Mission Control Cambrian Mark 2 with all the stuff that you've had offers.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, dearie me. So you're going to give us it's a little bit of a talk and a little bit of a demonstration, is it? So we're getting a bit of both this evening.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk us through where I need to. I'll stop out of the presentation and do a bit of practical parts, but most of it's all in the presentation anyway. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's brilliant. Shall we crack on? Did you want to go through the presentation first? Was it? Yeah.
Let's get us going.
Let's get us going. Let's bring that up onto there. It's gone black here, so I'm hoping that.
Let's hope this presentation starts. Just let me know if you can't see my screen.
I can see you absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, first things first is thank you ever so much to Cambrian for inviting me along. Thanks to Sarah, Paul and Joel. I did a talk for Cambrian 2 years ago now, and I kind of promised myself that I wouldn't do it again because I was a bit daunted by the whole the whole thing. So to be back, it's a privilege, but we'll see how we go. Now, the first talk that I did was on Astrophotography 101, and I gave a bit of a rundown on getting started with astrophotography. And today I wanted to take us slightly to the next level. I wanted to talk about how we can improve our astrophotography by using a star tracker. And the reason I did that was because I know that most of the people who will be watching this today have access to a digital SLR, and we can get started with that. So it doesn't mean that you have to go out there now and buy dedicated CCD cameras or anything sort of particular. All you need to do is get your hands on the star tracker. And affordable trackers are now a fantastic way to get started. They're not overly complex and you can get promising results quite quickly. So I'll make our way through and we'll see how we can get started with one of those, how we can set them up, some of the things that you need to be aware of when working with a star tracker, and then how we can, some of the settings that I use, and then onto some sort of example images of what we can expect to achieve. So as with all introductions, I better start off with a little bit about myself. So I'm Tracey Snelus, and I am an amateur astronomer. Astronomy is just my hobby. I'm not a professional in this. I have had an interest all of my life, and that's pretty much down to my dad. We used to go out and look under the stars as much as possible, and that's kind of stuck with me now for the entire of my life. And I always enjoy going out, and everything that I know has just been through experience, trial and error. So that's one thing that I just want to make clear, is that I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, but what I am doing is just sharing my experiences with you. But as part of that is I've managed to become a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, and now I'm currently the chair of the North Wales Astronomy Society, of which I've been part of that for the last 4 years. So there's links at the end of the show which will give you the link to the website. So if you are interested in coming along to any of our meetings, then you can just go to the website and find out about that. Obviously, because of COVID at the moment, we are limited on what we're doing. So we are sticking to some virtual workshops. But for me, really, it's all been about my passion for capturing the night sky. I've loved astronomy. Photography came as a sort of a second part to that. It was just a way for me to start to record what I'm seeing. But mostly my passions really lie with deep sky imaging. So I do a lot of sort of long exposure night sky, looking at the very super sort of, we can't see them with our naked eye quite readily. So for me, being able to open up that universe just by having a camera was something fascinating, and that's something that I would love to share with everybody, is getting people out there. And I don't care by what means that is, if it's just out with a pair of binoculars, out with your camera, or just sitting there and enjoying the night sky. For me, that is the best part, is just getting out and being under a beautiful, crisp, clear sky, of which tonight we're supposed to have a clear sky. So after this, I'm expecting everybody to run outside and go and take a look up into the sky. So enough about me. So let's start off with the bad news. Astrophotography by no means is not easy. There are things that we have to overcome, and it is about catching light at night. So those who are at my Astrophotography 101, I did tell you all about my trials and tribulations of getting through astrophotography and all the things that I'd learned along the way. So taking images of the night sky does poses new challenges to the photographer. But we can overcome some of those things anyway. So we can do that with our camera. We do that by changing exposure and changing ISO. So they allow us to collect as much light as we possibly can. And I tend to use lenses that are sitting around f2, f2.8. And the little image up at the top there just shows you an example there of the smaller f ratio, the wider you are able to open your lens. Therefore, you're allowed to let more light enter the camera and onto your sensor. And again, at the bottom there, we've just got an example of which shows you how, by changing ISO, what we can do is start to increase the sensitivity of the chip to the light that we're receiving. And that's another method of us trying to be able to collect more light at night. However, they do have their limitations. ISO in particular. Now, depending on the camera that you're using, the higher the ISO, the more noise that we start to introduce to our image. And additional to this, once you've collected your images, a bit of processing afterwards and stacking of images can help to build that up a little more so. However, the one thing that we are limited is that we are always in a race against time to catch as much subtle starlight as we can, and I'll explain that in the next slide. So here we will see the race against time is just down to a consequence of the Earth's rotation. So if you can imagine us being sat within this celestial sphere, as the Earth rotates, the stars above us also rotate in the night sky. And that causes a limitation, because what you'll start to see is that as we start to take longer exposures, we will get trailing of the stars. And that's not ideal when we're trying to make crisp astrophotographs. What we want is those stars nice and pinpoint. And for anyone who's ever seen a star trail, and I hope most of you recognise that that's over at Penmon on Anglesey, one of my favourite places ever, and one of many places where I've spent many a nights looking up at the night sky, either hunting the aurora or trying to see those ever elusive bioluminescent plankton. Never seen it once. Anyway, we're quite fortunate in the Northern Hemisphere in that we have this very nice star right in the centre there called Polaris. And as you can see in this image, all of the stars are rotating around that. And that's our sort of north pointer. But I'll get onto that as we start to talk about the star tracker and how we get that set up. But it's something that we need to be aware of. So yeah, the limitation is the stars are moving at night, and that's where a star tracker comes into it. A moment. So this just shows you that when you're working with a normal tripod, if you have a 50mm lens and you're looking at the celestial equator, as you start to increase your exposure times, what you start to introduce is trailing into the stars. So at 1.6 seconds, it's quite pinpoint, but by 15 seconds in, we're starting to see those stars trail. And that's not ideal when we're trying to get nice pictures. And 1.6 seconds at night is not going to give us enough to be able to catch those intricate, especially when we're looking at the Milky Way and we want to start pulling out and teasing those dark veils and the bright areas. Really, we want nice long exposures. Let's go back. Oh, I'm flicking around. Sorry, apologies. I knew I shouldn't have started on the gin. Anyway, what I'm going to be talking about tonight, or the star tracker in particular that I use, is the Star Adventurer. And this is made by Star Watcher. And there's two types. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to step out of the presentation, and I can show you the two trackers that I have next to me. So hopefully that has stopped sharing. There we go. So what we have here is, this is the Star Adventurer. This is the older version, which is the Star Adventurer. It's not the mini version which we have here. So we have two types. There's the Star Adventurer Mini, and then what we'd call sort of the standard Star Adventurer. And this is the one that I've been using mostly. This one's relatively new, so I don't have all that much experience with this one yet. But for portability wise, as you can see, they're relatively small units. And quite versatile, so they're easy to pack away. The Star Adventurer Mini in particular is very good for portability. It does have the ability to use it with an app on your phone. So for those who are tech savvy and like to have things controlled through their phone, the Star Adventurer Mini allows you to do that. So I'm just going to swap back into go back into, just while I cover some of the features. So these features are just ones that are given on the Star Adventurer website, so I don't need to go through all of them, but some of the main parts is that we have a built-in polar scope, and I'll explain that a little later. We have an interface for digital SLRs to be able to control your shutter. It's low power consumption, which is good because what these operate off is just 4 AA batteries. You do have the ability to run it off an external mini USB power support. And they have quite a good payload, so you can take up to 5 kilograms. So on these you can mount cameras with relatively big lenses on, and also small telescopes if that takes your fancy. So you can use them for observational astronomy too. It doesn't always have to be about astrophotography. So my mouse is overly sensitive, so forgive me if I keep flicking backwards and forwards. So the Star Adventurer Astro Bundle, this is pretty much what comes in the pack. You have a L bracket dovetail bar, which allows you to connect a counterweight. So if you're mounting a larger telescope or a camera with a large lens, then you have a counterweight on there. Just helps with the balance and doesn't put too much strain on the motors. Then what we have is this, it's called a wedge, and this is an important part of the Astro Bundle pack, because this allows us to change our angle, the Star Adventurer body, to the correct latitude from where you're observing from. And again, as I go through this, I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So if it does seem a bit like, what the hell are you on about, Trace? Don't worry, we'll get there. And finally, the red body here, which is the motorized unit, and inside there is a polar scope. So let's take a look. Here we go. So setting up the Star Adventurer, as I've just shown you the 2 different types that we have, and I have 2 different configurations here. So the one on the left hand side here, you can see it's the larger scope, the larger lens with the camera. And for this, I've used the counterweight, and it's using the L bracket with the declination attachment on. And this is on the Star Adventurer Mini, and you can see that both of them here have the 2 wedges. And in this configuration, this one's probably the simplest configuration, where it's just a ball head connected to the Star Adventurer with the camera attached on top. And that one's pretty good if you're just going to be doing wide field and you're not putting anything too heavy onto the mount. And in both cases, what we do need is a strong, sturdy tripod. For both of these, we've got them on Burlback wooden tripods. I find them to be exceptionally good at sturdiness and not so prone to vibration. So if you already have a sturdy tripod and a digital SLR, all you really need to get started now is the tracker. Now, there are other trackers available, but obviously I'm only ever going to tell you about ones that I know about. So there's plenty more out there, but the Star Adventurer, it's done an absolutely fantastic job for me, and it's an absolutely versatile, exceptional piece of kit. And of course, you can buy them from Cambrian. So my advice to anybody who is going out there to do any type of astrophotography is to be prepared. That's always going to be one of my, it will always be the baseline. Be prepared. The more prepared you are, the more chance you are of going to be successful. So you need to get yourself a strong, sturdy tripod. You need to make sure that you've got batteries plus spares, because the last thing that you want is to be out there on a cold night and run out of batteries halfway through your run. And the good thing about the Star Adventure is it is just 4 AA batteries, so we can just carry a pack of those with us. Or as always, try and get set up as early as possible. Give yourself enough time, and also try and do that sort of dusk time, because what you don't want to be doing is, especially with a new piece of equipment, is to be fumbling around in the dark, getting frustrated, not knowing where everything is. Give yourself the best chance of being successful. And that's, again, back to that being prepared. So take the time as well to make sure that everything is tight. Once it's all set up, just go around it and check all your connection bolts. When things are all fit together, make sure that there's no wobble. And as always, have a red light torch or headlamp at the ready, because when it does get dark, you'll need to be able to see what you're doing at night. And by using a red light torch, it enables you to maintain your night vision. So try not to use a white light torch, not only because it might annoy people around you. If you're with a group of astronomers in particular, you'll get in trouble, but having a red light torch there is favourable, and it stops you from being blinded. Here we go again with my epileptic presentation. So for a star tracker to be successful and for it to do its job, there's some fundamental things that you just have to do. So with anything new or any new equipment, they do come with their own challenges, and star trackers are not void of that. So we must be able to polar align the star tracker to the North Star. And I'm only talking about the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's a whole different new ball game, because they don't. That's why I said, thankfully, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have the nice Polaris star, which is our pinpointer. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's a little bit more trickier to find true south. But regardless of what tracker you are using, there's pretty much 3 fundamental things that you need to be doing. And that's having the tripod at level. And thankfully, with the Star Adventure, it has a built-in spirit level, so that helps us, and that's on the wedge portion. The second part is to be able to set the altitude for the location. So in North Wales, we are 53 degrees north. So that's the altitude that we would be setting our mount to. And I've got some demonstrations of that as we go through it. So again, if it all sounds like nonsense at the moment, hopefully as we step through this, it will start to make more sense. And then the final part is that we have to align to the North Star or Polaris. Having those 3 things set allows us to have successful polar alignment. Therefore, we can track successfully, and the stars then will be nice and pinpoint. So let's take a little bit here. So setting the latitude, what we can see here is there's this little clutch here that we can loosen off, and then there's a bolt here that we can use to move the axis up and down. And this is our latitude marker. So I've got a nice little video here which just shows how to do that. Hopefully this plays. So what you've seen there in that video is just unlocking of the clutch here, and then moving this backwards and forwards and able to set the correct latitude. So that's one of the things that we need to be doing. Obviously this we're on level ground here. We've already checked that the tripod is level. So moving on. So the next part is we've set our latitude, we've got a level mount. When we go outside with our Star Adventurer, once we have it, what we need to do is set the Star Adventurer so that it is pointing to the North Star. Now, I know that I've mentioned Polaris a couple of times, but for those of you who aren't familiar with the night sky, you need to know which star is Polaris, because obviously if you're going out at night, many people just think that Polaris is the brightest star in the sky, and that isn't true. But there is an easy way to find it. And if you know the constellation commonly known as the Plough or Ursa Major, it's the asterism is called the Plough. then we're able to find the North Star. So if I play this video, it should show us how we can get to that North Star. And as you see on the screen at the moment, what we have is a star field, but knowing which one of those is Polaris can be quite tricky if you don't know the night sky. So let's just show you how we can find that. So if we find the plough, and we take the 2 stars at the end of the plough, and then we follow that in a straight line up to the next brightest star, and that takes us to Polaris. Okay, so you've got to remember that, and you've got to go out and practice, because wherever you go, you've got to be out there and you've got to be able to find it. You can also use the constellation of Cassiopeia, which is the constellation which is shaped like a W. But for most people, the plough is the one that everybody knows, and it's just easy. So look for the plough, which is also known as the saucepan. So you find the 4 stars of the pan, take the 2 end stars away from the handle, and follow it up to the North Star Polaris. Easy. As I said, get out there and practice. Start finding that North Star. So here we are, just showing us now that what we've got is the Star Adventurer set up with the correct latitude setting, and the pole scope running through the centre here will be pointing up to that North Star. But that's not the end of polar alignment. There's a little bit more that we need to do. And I think polar alignment is something really important for anybody who's starting in astrophotography, because it's a skill that will take you through. It doesn't matter what you do, and if you have a bigger equatorial mount, knowing how to polar align is going to do you great justice for the future. It makes life so much easier. So I'm going to start talking us through that process. And as I said, thankfully, the Star Adventurers come with a built-in pole scope, which allow us to correctly align to the North Star. And on here, what you can see on this picture is we have an illuminated reticule. So this is just a little LED light that we can switch on and off using a little dial underneath here, and it just emits a small dim red light. So at night time, when you're looking through the pole scope, you'll be able to see the reticule and you'll be able to see Polaris. Okay, let's go again. So polar alignment, as I said, is the tricky part. And this is where you become apt at developing what we call as astronomer's knee and becoming a yoga master. It's called astronomer's knee because what you usually have to do is get down on one knee, like you're going to propose to your Star Adventurer, and you need to look up through the pole scope. I'm just going to come out of the presentation again, just so I can show you that part. Here we go. Let's escape. Let's hope. So, as you can see, the actual pole scope is here. So, this is where astronomer's knee comes into it. Because if you've got your tripod set up and it's like this, you need to be looking through there. So to do that, you've got to get down on one knee, propose, get your astronomer's knee, because when you get back up, it's guaranteed to be muddy or wet. And then you look up through. Now, in this instance, you won't see anything because this is in the way. But on this one, I would be able to see straight through. So that's why I say it's astronomy or yoga, because you usually find yourself doing silly little things like that. It's not one for maintaining dignity, astrophotography. You find yourself in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. Or what you can do is you can make one of these, which is a viewfinder with a I believe that's just a film canister on the end attached. And what you can do then is fit that onto the pole scope here, so it just slots on. And then that way, what you can do is just look through it rather than getting down and dirty. So that's the sort of the next stage of where we'd need to go. So I'll go back into the presentation again. Sorry, backwards and forwards. Make sure I'm clicking the right buttons. There we go. So let's put that onto full. There we go. So when you look through the pole scope, what you'll be presented with is a reticule with different numbers and different markers. Okay. And the idea is that when we've set up outside and we've pointed the tripod in the general direction of north, what we need to do is get Polaris into the right position on this reticule. Okay, and I'll explain how we can do that. It's very easy because thankfully there are apps that we can use. There we go. So the app that I use is something called Polarscope Align Pro, and it's $2.99. There are others available. Now, I know that I'm using an iPhone, and I haven't checked whether or not this is available on Android. I think it is, but there are other ones out there. So if you did a search for Polarscope Align or something like that, it should be able to give you some options for your phone. So what the app does is, for your location and for the date, it will tell you where Polaris should be positioned. So you're presented with the same reticule as what you can see when you look through the pole scope. And this will tell you here that this is where, for this time and date, this is where Polaris should be positioned. Sounds tricky, but it's not so bad. So if I could stop doing that, it would be great. There we go. So this is just that example. So this equates to what you look through on the pole scope. So you can see the X marks the spot of where you need to be putting Polaris. And then on the next slide, what I will do is just talk you through some of the adjustment bolts that we use on the Star Adventurer in order to get that fine tweaking. So as you can see here that are marked out, we've got 2 azimuth bolts. So this allows you to move the Star Adventurer very slightly left and right. And again, I've got a video which demonstrates that. So just making those small slight adjustments on those will move the Star Adventurer left and right just gently to be able to position Polaris. What we'll also see is that another thing to note on the Star Adventurer is these sort of Allen screws. These need to be tight, but not so tight that we can't move it, because the adjustments are actually moving on that bolt there. But when I say make sure that things are tight, those are one of the bolts that we should be checking, because they do tend to work loose over time, and then you're able to actually wiggle the mount on the tripod, and that's not very good, because any amount of wobble then is just going to be quite clear and apparent when you start to do your longer exposures. Okay. Let's get past that. And then the good old altitude bolt, which we'd already seen demonstrated earlier. So this is the one now that allows us to do slight tweaks up and down, but when we're using it to do the polar alignment, we don't need to undo this lock. We should just be able to twist it, and it's only very slight. So this bit here is now a demonstration of what's expected to be seen. So out you go, you set up your Star Adventurer, you point it north, you've got you've got your tripod level, you've got your latitude set, you've got your tripod pointing north, then you look through your pole scope, and what you will see is Polaris is sitting somewhere within the field of view of within your reticule. Now we need to change those adjustment bolts. So the ones that I've just shown you, we do tweaks on those to bring that down, and I've done a quick little demonstration on how we do that. So just adjusting the bolts until we move that to, we're changing the altitude now to bring it down, and then the azimuth bolts left and right to bring Polaris into the position where X marks the spot. And at that point, you're polar aligned. Now, this is the hardest part of the whole thing, really, is making sure your polar alignment is spot on. If that's out, then you're going to limit again how long you can expose for before you start to see trailing. Obviously, if we're using a wide angle lens, that trailing won't become so apparent so quickly. But if we start to use something bigger like this 400mm lens, if we're not polar aligned quite right, then that trailing happens quite quickly. And that could potentially be down to just not having that polar alignment spot on. So as I say, if you are going to be using a tracker, they will require you to have this skill. And for anyone who is seriously thinking about getting into astrophotography, there's pretty much no way of avoiding it. It's definitely something that you need to learn, but it's not so daunting. It really isn't. It just takes practice. And that's all I'll ever say to anybody is astrophotography. It's back to those 3 Ps that I keep talking about, which is patience, practice, and perseverance. Without that, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So be prepared. Okay. Well, let's not do that again. And once polar aligned, please do not kick or move the tripod. If you do, you have to do everything again. And you know what that means? Tantrums. And that has been my face many a times when doing astrophotography. You think you're getting everything right, everything's working, and then you do the most simplest thing of knocking the tripod, and then you have to go again. But don't be put off. It's part of the game. And guess what? Even though I've told you, you will still do it. So let's not be so hard on ourselves. We'll just accept that one as a given. The worst one is usually when you start exposing and then realise that you've left your lens cap on, your batteries have run out, you forgot something totally fundamental. The list goes on, but as I say, experience. So once we are now polar aligned, that's pretty much the Star Adventurer set up and ready to go. The next part of it really is now manipulating your camera either on the ball head or the mount in order to get your frame and focus right. So I'll come back out again of the presentation. Stop sharing. There we go. So here we are. Nicely aligned, facing north, level, everything set up. I haven't kicked the mount. But what I want to do now is start to move my camera into the right place. What you'll see here is on the top is that what I have is a red dot finder. It has a bracket that's fixed to the flash foot plate. So it just sits into the top there. And now it's just a case of finding your target. So if you have the red dot finder on, it makes life a little bit easier, because if you look through this part, it puts a little red dot when you're looking through, so you know that you're going to get to target, or where you want to frame your where you want to frame your image. So let's say we wanted to, so we can just move it quite readily on the ball mount, and then we've got these clutches that I mentioned before. So you just loosen that off, and then that allows you to rotate. It's handy at this point to have, if you do have a camera, to have one with the one where the screen flips out, because it makes it a little easier to actually see what you're doing. So that's one thing to consider, because again, you don't want to be tucking around doing yoga poses on a muddy field. You might get asked what you're doing. So yeah, once you're in position and we've got to where we need to be, we can just lock off. Now, knowing where to find the targets, I won't be covering in this talk, but I would hope that most people, if you take my advice of being prepared, you've already decided what targets you're going to be imaging, and you kind of have an idea of where they are. But there are apps again available on your mobile phone, and one that I can certainly recommend, if I can ever, is Sky Guide. So you probably won't see it very well on there, but Sky Guide is a very cool interactive app. And if you don't know where something is, then you can just do the whole hold up to the night sky and it will show you where things are. So that's a very useful app. Another one is Sky Safari. They do cost, but they're not very much, and they're probably worth it. So yeah, you're never going to be lost. And for most people, if you are doing wide field, then it's probably going to be things like the Milky Way that you're wanting to shoot. So you can use apps like photo pills as well to help you plan some of those nightscape images that you might want to take. And then I'll move back into the presentation, so you'd have to keep looking at me. Let's go back into share. Applications, right, there we go. So that's just talking about, so now we've positioned, now it's just a case of some of the actual features on the Star Adventure app. Here we go. So on the side of the Star Adventurer, what you'll see is 7 different settings. There's 8 if you include off as a setting, but what you'll see is they've got different markers. So you've got one which is a star. So that's the one that we will tend to use for starry nights, and that's tracking at sidereal rate. So that means it's moving at the same rate that the stars are moving. Then we have one for solar, one for lunar, and then we have what's called a 0.5 times, a 2 times, a 6 times, and a 12 times. So these ones here are used for the time-lapse function, and I will show you that very quickly in a moment. But for astrophotography purposes, it will just be this star one that we're going to use. And as I said, you can use this for, if you had a solar scope, then this would be ideal as a mount for solar scope, because then you can have it as a tracking solar scope. Or if you have a camera with the correct solar filters on it, then you could use that for taking some solar images. And again, if you wanted to track the moon, you can set it onto the lunar track rate. So they're quite handy. One thing to note, in particular on the Star Adventurer, is that this dial doesn't lock off. So if you are carrying it in your bag with you, I would suggest taking the batteries out, because what can happen is this switches over and moves onto the on position, and you don't know that whilst it's in your bag, it's ticking away and it's tracking, and then you take it out and find out that your batteries are dead. That's a killer, because you haven't even got anything out of it then apart from a dead Star Adventurer. But of course, you listened to me and you took my advice earlier, and you have spares, so it's not all lost. And then on the come on. On the other side of the Star Adventurer, we have another few settings, which is we've got a marker for S, N, and this is very important. This is telling the Star Adventurer what hemisphere you are in. Now, obviously, we're in the northern hemisphere, so that switch has to be switched to north. Now, if you're out there and you know that you've polar aligned successfully, and you take your first exposure and you've got trailing stars, your batteries aren't dead, then just check this side and make sure that it hasn't switched to south, because if it is, you're going to trail, and you're going to trail pretty quickly. So just be aware of that. And then there's also this time lapse, which is just set in the center. You'll see two buttons here which will allow you to just fine tune the movements left and right on the Star Adventurer. It just pushes the motor quickly, so you can just helps with your framing when you're trying to get something centered without having to loosen all of the clutches. You can just tweak those to move, get your framing right. What else you will see on there is this snap function. So you can buy an extra cable which will plug from here into your camera's intervalometer port, and it will automatically set the exposures for, so it will automatically take multiple exposures for you. I don't use that because I think on the Star Adventure it's limited to, the settings are limited. What I do use is a timed intervalometer, which is a lot more versatile, because you can set the delay, the longitude, how long between shots, the intervals of the shots, and how many shots you want to take. And once you have this up and running, you just leave it going. So I don't tend to use that snap function. What else you will see on there is the auto guider port. Again, that is something that I haven't used because I haven't found the need to, but auto guiding is now into the realms of very, very long exposure, and an auto guider uses another camera to monitor a star's position, and if it sees any movement in that star, it will feed back to the mount, and it just makes that you have absolute precision. But for the purposes of wide field nightscapes and sort of wider field astrophotography, then that's not necessary. And from my experience, if you have your Star Adventurer very well polar aligned and you're working on something like a 50mm lens, I've had exposures of up to 30 minutes where I haven't seen any trailing, so I haven't found the need for an auto guider. And then eventually, the last part is just a DC input, and that's just, you can have a USB powered input to that. So those are the other features that you will see on the Star Adventurer. And here is just when I was talking about the time-lapse mode. Now, this is quite handy that a lot of people might like, because I don't know if many of you seen when people do Milky Way shots and they're doing it over the night and it's doing a time-lapse and it's panning. That's exactly what you can do with this as well. So you can set it to pan. So if you wanted to use it as you say, for daytime stuff as well, you can do. Now, on the Star Adventurer, the red one here, I know that it is limited. It will only go 60 degrees in one direction and then repeats back to center. Or you can have it go 60 degrees the other way and back to center. What it doesn't do is all the way around, which the Star Adventurer Mini, I believe you can actually make that change, so it will do a full rotation. And on this setting, I had it set to the fastest, 12 times, so that's where you can see that it moves quite rapidly. But I just wanted to show that as a function, because for some people that would be quite useful, that if you were thinking about buying a star tracker and getting into astrophotography, but you know, it's not everything that you do, but you also do a bit of time lapse, then it's still worth considering just for those functions too. So just to bring us to a recap at the moment before we move on a little bit, the star trackers, they allow you to increase the exposure times of the night sky before stars start to trail. So by doing so, you can start now to pull out more detail, and that's what we want. We want to be able to see those beautiful little gems. Increasing the exposure time is only one factor to help you collect more light at night. As I've mentioned before, we've got aperture and ISO. Your tripod must be level, you must be polar aligned, and you must have power. And learn how to use your equipment in the day and try to set up early. Okay. And if I keep doing this anymore, I might quit. Okay, so exposure times. So it's always a bit of a bugbear when people say, well, how long do I expose for? How do I, well, I can't give an absolute on exposure times. It depends on what you're trying to image. It depends on the conditions in which you're imaging in. Under very dark skies, you can expose for 5-10 minutes without, even longer, without any issues. It also depends on your other settings. What f-stop number are you working on? What ISO do you want to work with? You know, then we've also got limitations from light pollution. There's no point having lots of a long exposure time if it's just going to be blown out by the surrounding light pollution. Clarity and seeing of the sky can also help determine how long you can or can't expose for. Camera amp glow, it's not so much an issue, but on some dedicated cameras, what you can get is glow from your chip. So if you start exposing for too long a time, you start to get artifacts within your image. And then obviously the longer that you're exposing, and in particular if you have a high ISO, then you start to introduce that camera noise. And sometimes it's only really when we start to get really sort of into deep sky astrophotography that we really want to be pushing our exposure times, because the longer we expose, the more light we can collect, the more detail we can tease out of those final images. But we can build up a very good image by just having lots of sort of well exposed images stacked over time. So there's no sort of surefire answer for me to be able to give you for exposure times, I'm afraid. And that does just come with trial and error. So what do I image with? So this is a list of when I'm on my Star Adventurer in particular, what I'm running with. So obviously my camera, of which I either use the Fuji X-T2 or the X-T1. Absolutely fantastic kit. All of my astrophotography in the past has always been with Canon. And it was maybe, I can't remember, maybe 4 years ago, when I had the XT1 and I took a Milky Way shot, and I was absolutely blown away at the detail that was coming out of it. So that was it. It was like, no, I was a convert from there. Lenses, I have a multitude of lenses, but for wide field, then I have a 27mm, the 35, sorry, and a 14mm, and those are the usually f2.8 or f2. I have an intervalometer, so that's the shutter release cable, the timed one. Dew bands, that's something to really consider. What they are is just heated bands that you can put around your lens, and as the night starts to cool, what you don't want is dew forming on the front of your camera, and you don't want to keep going there and rubbing it off with cloths. So dew band helps overcome that, and you can get USB ones now that you can just plug into a USB power pack. So it's not like you have to have an additional power source for those. The red dot finder, as I'd explained earlier, that's a handy tool for helping you to find the target that you're after. Of course, spare batteries, I'm going to keep piping on about that one because I've done that error so many times. Charged phone, so if you have the Star Adventurer Mini and you're running everything off your app, make sure that you have your phone charged up. A red light torch, and a 20p piece. That's I'm sure everybody who uses a camera attached to a tripod, you'll find a 20p piece useful for undoing your connectors at the bottom of the cameras to be able to attach and unattach things. It's usually a handy piece to have in your pocket. So in terms of settings, when I am imaging on the Star Adventurer, the camera is set to bulb function because that allows me to use my intervalometer and takes everything to manual. I use manual focus, and focus is usually set to infinity, but proceed with caution when it comes to focusing. It's quite tricky to focus at night. You need to try and find either a light quite far in the distance to be able to focus on, or another quite bright star. You can get masks called Batinov masks that will give you diffraction spikes that will aid in your focus if you want to be quite particular about your focus. But setting to infinity should get you there. But as I say, proceed with caution, because infinity on the lens is never usually quite the perfect focus. You might need to just tweak it back a little bit. And then ISO, now again, this depends on your camera's capabilities of handling noise. I always say start around ISO 800 and then you can work backwards and forwards from there. But for me, that's always my go-to. I always start off about there. Then I can go up and down quite readily. It's not too arduous a task to change the ISO. Okay. So this is now just moving on to some example images. So the image on the left, so they're not the same location, obviously, but it does start to show now how we can get more detail out of your Milky Way images in particular when we start going into using a tracker versus non-tracked. So the one on the left there is a 14mm lens, ISO 1600, so my ISO is higher, and it's just 30 seconds, and that was taken at Llangrennig. Bit of a misty night, but you can see I have got detail there. It's taken a lot of processing to pull that out. But in comparison, the one on the right-hand side there, we've got just a 3-minute tracked, and you can see now how we're really starting to pull out some of these nice intricate details, and some of these clusters sitting down here nice and bright, and you know, it just starts to see that fantastic structure throughout. It makes you happy, doesn't it? And it's just, it does make a difference. And I know my images aren't the best wide field images. My Milky Way images aren't the best. It's still something that I'm learning. But I definitely know that using a tracker is going to make a big difference. So another example image. So this is actually two frames put together. So if you draw a line sort of down the center of this image here, I've taken one pane here and then another pane on this side and stitched the two images together. So this is now looking at a portion of the Milky Way up in the constellation of Cygnus. And now what you start to see is you're starting to really pull out some of that detail within the structures of the Milky Way. Thousands and thousands of stars. It's just mind-blowing, it's utterly fantastic. And then just another one, the next one kind of just shows wrong way again. I'll get it right by the end of next week. So this one is another night sky, and this one's the same region, but I'm just over a little bit further. And this one was just a single 2-minute exposure. So this is 2 minutes untracked. 2 minutes tracked single exposure, and just within those 2 minutes, you can really start to see some of those structures coming out again here. So it just makes a difference. Once you start to increase your exposure time, the amount of detail that you start to get out is just phenomenal. And then probably this has got to be one of my favourite Milky Way images that I've took. And this, even now when I look at it, I'm like, I can't believe I took it. And I just want to keep trying to get images like this. And I know it's not the best, but for me it's one of my favorite Milky Way images, because this is now we're really starting to get into astrophotography, because for me it's got some fantastic features in here. And this was a 3-minute exposure tracked on the Star Adventurer, but this shows us how much difference it makes when we're working under dark skies. So this was in the south of France, where we had stayed on holiday, and it was beautiful dark skies. And to be able to just see this, and the Milky Way was glowing overhead, and to just image it was fantastic. But for me, what I really want to get across here is, and I'll say this in every single talk that I'll ever give, is it's okay doing astrophotography, but what I really want people to know is what they're looking at. Because here we are looking towards the centre of our galaxy. It's the centre of our Milky Way. And when we start to look closer at this next picture will start to show us some of those features. So within that 3-minute exposure, what I'm starting to see now is these bright nebulas. So this is the Omega Nebula. It's 5,000 light years away. The Sagittarius star cloud, 10,000 light years away. The Trifid Nebula, which is an absolutely beautiful sight, and the Lagoon Nebula. And then somewhere down here in this little region here is the supermassive black hole that sits in the center of our galaxy, sucking everything in. But don't worry, it's not going to get us. But just this is where the magic of astrophotography really starts for me. It's beautiful being outside under the night sky, but when you really start to understand what you're looking at, it's mesmerizing. Because now look at it this way. For me to have taken this very image, the light from that Sagittarius star cloud has travelled 10,000 light years. It's taken that long for those photons of light to travel to me, for me to capture them on my camera, and now to turn that into an image. Now that to me is what astrophotography is about. It's not only seeing those beautiful details, but just knowing that that has happened. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So if that doesn't convince you to do astrophotography, I don't know what will. But but do be aware it will be a pain in the bum. Okay. So before I keep churning on about why, let's talk about some of the software. Because obviously once we start getting into astrophotography, we have to start thinking about software, so post-processing. So we do usually stack multiple images. So you'll take lots and lots and lots of these images, and then we stack them together. In doing so, it builds up that picture, it builds up the detail. And you can use software such as Deep Sky Stacker. There's software called PixInsight, which is dedicated astrophoto package, but it's quite expensive and not very intuitive to use, so I'd avoid that. Mac users can use things like Starry Sky Stacker, Starry Landscape Stacker, and Star Stacks. So there's plenty of options out there. And then when you're coming into processing the final images, I tend to use just Photoshop and Lightroom. Lightroom is exceptionally good at final tweaks of images. But again, processing is a different ball game. Again, it's a skill set to its own. Points to consider though: if you are a nightscape photographer and you're using a star tracker, your foreground will blur. Therefore, you're going to have to learn how to take a foreground exposure and then composite the two images together. That's just a word of warning to those who want to do fanciful Milky Way nightscapes. Unless you use Starry Landscape Stacker, which apparently does it for you, so I'm told, but I'm not much of a Mac user, so I've never had experience of that. But if anyone does use it successfully, please let me know. And then there's another thing called dark frames. I don't want to cover it too much, but I'll just touch on it. Dark frames is something that we take, and they are taken at the same exposure time as the light frame. So if I was taking a 3-minute light frame, what I would usually do is a 3-minute dark frame. Though it doesn't have to be the equivalent number, it's just a few dark frames, and you take those with the lens cap on. And what that does is just get an idea of the noise, and it subtracts it from the final image. But again, that's going more into the post-processing side of it, which I'm not intending on covering here. I just wanted to give everybody an overview of how to use a star tracker, what the advantage of it is, why we should be using it, why using one is going to make massive improvements to your stepping into the astrophotography realm, and in a relatively cheap way to do it. So just in terms of cost, actually, while I mention on it, the Star Adventurer Pro package, I think is around £250 thereabouts. Yeah, obviously get yourself in touch with Cambrian, and I'll let you know. Or have a look on the internet, but obviously preference is to go to Cambrian. So taking it to the next level. So where do you go after this? I can guarantee you that if you get into astrophotography, you're going to start wanting to get into more. And this is just showing you my my setup. So as I said, my Star Adventurers are just things that I do when I can't be bothered. You know, it's good to get out there sometimes. Sometimes you just want a nice, quick, easy night. And for me, that's just being able to set up on the Star Adventurer and get out there quite quickly. When you start to get into astrophotography, it's a whole new ball game, and then you're really looking into some sort of dedicated equipment, and that's when you start to then look at taking these real super long exposures. So these are some of the images that I take on my other setups. So these are all through telescopes, one is the Orion, the Horsehead Nebula in the constellation of Orion. Beautiful target. Then the Andromeda Galaxy. And my mouse is not very good. It loves going back that way. And then finally we have the Rosette Nebula, which is just a mind-blowing thing. So when you start getting into the realms of deep sky astrophotography, these are things that you just won't see without using cameras. And and this is what I love about astrophotography. It's about seeing the unseen, and that is fantastic because it's there. And on that, I'll just leave you. This is me running my Star Adventurer one night, backwards and forth, with the Milky Way arched overhead. And as I say, for me, going out under the night sky is solace in itself. Even if I got the worst image in the world and it didn't work and I had my tantrum because I kicked the tripod, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. You've got to go out there and you've got to try. You do these things, but guess what? It's got you out there under a beautiful, calm night sky, and there's nothing better really than just being out there and pondering the wonders of the universe. And that's all I want everyone to do, is to go out there and have a look and experience it in whichever way you find the most fruitful. And I'll end on this now. And these will always be my pointers. Always take your time. Know your equipment. You have to know it. You don't want to be fumbling about in the dark and getting frustrated with it. It's going to set you up to hate it from the start. Practice and set up in the day. Start easy and keep it simple. Wrap up warm and be safe, because you don't want to be out there and get cold, because again, it gets cold quite quickly when you're out there. And if you're not warm, you're not going to be comfortable. You're not going to want to take the time to take the images. Enjoy it. That's the biggest thing, is do it because you enjoy it. Do it because it's fun. Do it because you love being out there. And then finally, make mistakes. Don't be scared of making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. It's fundamental to the process. You're going to do it. You're going to make mistakes, but don't be disheartened by it. But try not to make those mistakes twice, because then you're just stupid, apparently. And on that note, I realise that I've gone over just a little bit. I wasn't intending for it to go on for so long, but it has. I hope that you haven't all fallen asleep on your Sunday afternoon. And I'd just like to thank you and to just say keep looking up. There's the two websites there. So there's the North Wales Astronomy, and then there's also the Black Cat Observatory, which is my own personal website. So if you go onto there, you can see some of the works and some of my equipment. And all the other astronomy stuff that I do. So it doesn't just end at photography. There's a whole host of other stuff that I get involved with. That's all on there. And just finally, a thank you to you all, and a hello, Mum, because I believe that she's watching. I hope that I've done her proud and that she's not now snoozing, wondering what mistakes she made in the past. And on that note, I can pass back to Paul. Thank you.
Well, Tracey, that was lovely. So inspiring. Absolutely amazing. So, and no, far from putting anyone to sleep, the engagement that we've had, so the comments have been coming through, have just been absolutely stunning. And they still keep coming. They really, really do. So, yeah, they're all there. Wonderful talk, brilliant talk. Thank you. Learned so much. Fantastic talk. Fantastic presentation. Sarah, she's ace. Thanks, Tracey. Someone says you're a star.
Oh, I wonder who that is.
Wonder who that is. Yeah, so absolutely inundated with with thank you comments there. So
Good.
yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. And you know, I get this when anyone talks any astro, and like with yourself and Alan that we had the other day, and the sort of podcasts that I listen to. As soon as you start talking about, especially how things are far away as well, it just gets you going. It really does. Yeah. And
really
you know,
does.
for even even the local stars, to us are so many light years away. It's taken that amount of time, in years, for that light from that star to come to us and land on our cameras is just absolutely mind blowing. It really, really is. So yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. I don't think we've had much questions because I think you've covered it all, which is brilliant.
That's good. I was waiting for a flurry of questions. You don't put me on the spot.
No, you've done really well. There were a couple of questions popping up, but you sort of answered them naturally as we went along anyway. Okay. So cool. Yeah, so literally everything covered from there. So yeah, no, that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you ever so much for joining us this Sunday evening. It's been a pleasure to have you, and looks like it's been a pleasure from everyone watching as well, that you've joined us as well.
Can I just add in one more thing?
Yep.
One more thing that I need to add is that tonight, it looks like it's going to be a clear sky. There's going to be 2 passes of the International Space Station that are going over. I'll just get those times up for us now. So there's going to be one at 22:07, so 7 minutes past 10. There'll be the International Space Station passing overhead. So look for a nice bright light that will be travelling from west through to east. And then at 23:44, we'll be able to see the same again. So go and have a look out for that. And then just at sunset, if we look towards the western horizon, tonight we should be able to see the planet Venus quite brightly. And just off to it, you should get a slither of the new moon. So if you're not inspired to get your cameras out, at least be inspired to get out and have a look for those.
Yeah, go and have a look, because it's all about the looking and enjoying of it. And absolutely. I'm sure once you start, you get hooked and you never stop. And it's a great hobby to get into.
Absolutely.
Right, we'll say bye-bye for now, Tracey. Just hold on the line and I'll speak to you after the live. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, what an amazing talk. Absolutely lovely to have Tracey with us as well. So I did mention just at the very beginning that I'll just mention the talks that we're having tomorrow. So just let me bring up my screen. So yeah, Monday, 25th of May, we're going to be having in the morning David Yeoman, who's going to be talking about the process of printing, which is going to be once again a lovely presentation walkthrough on how to do printing. And then in the evening, we're going to be with Paul Sanders, once again, another sort of mindfulness, inspirational sort of talk from Paul. So looking forward to both of those speakers tomorrow, those talks. But for today, that is everything. Thank you very much for watching. If you've been watching live, thank you ever so much for your comments. It's lovely to see everyone commenting. If you're watching this video after the fact, so on a rewatch, you can still like, subscribe, share, do all of those things. And the more you do it, the more it helps us sort of put the word out for our virtual show, so other people can enjoy it as well. Until tomorrow, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.